strategic environment. And we did last year an assessment of the threats and challenges, and the overall view is that we are witnessing instability, conflicts, transnational threats that impact our security, and certainly using hybrid tactics, as we see today at the border with Belarus. Something that some months ago it was even difficult to imagine. And in the foreword to the strategic compass, I've been writing, and I think that is very much timely to remember that the classic distinction between war and peace has been diminishing. It's not black and white. The world is full of hybrid situations where we face intermediate dynamics of competition, intimidation, and coercion. And what we are seeing today in the Polish and Lithuanian border with Belarus is a typical example of that. This illustrates very well what was written before, that we face a hybrid war with a lot of grays between black and white, between peace and classical war, where everything is being weaponized. This is a perfect example of the challenges that I was describing in my foreword to the strategic compass. So the first thing to do is, in practical terms, to identify the challenges, and second, how to respond to them. To which and to how, with which means. And in the compass proposes, and I've been discussing and explaining to the ministers, and it is the first public press conference in which I am explaining publicly what the compass is about. We have been analyzing the 4 dimensions of the compass, that we refer to them with 4 verbs: to secure, to act, to invest, and to partner. First, to act. The European Union needs to be able to act more robustly, rapidly, and decisively in responses to crisis. We need to take decisions faster, to be more flexible, and to adopt more robust mandates for our missions. In this context is when I propose on the strategic compass text to develop a European Union rapid deployment capacity that would allow to swiftly deploy modular forces up to a certain number that we put on 5,000 troops. But based on operational scenarios, it's the missions who determines the force that you have to use, the capabilities that you have to use, and these forces and capabilities have to train together, exercise together, in order to increase their interoperability and readiness. This is one of the most important messages. We need to act robustly, rapidly, decisively in response to crisis. And for that, we have to have the capacities that could deploy forces. The second one, not less important, is to secure, because we need to strengthen our overall resilience and our capacity to protect the Union and its citizens against the new kind of cyber attacks and hybrid threats. That's why we propose to develop a hybrid toolbox to ensure a more coordinated response to hybrid campaigns, as to further develop responses to impose costs on the perpetrators of foreign information manipulation and interference. The cyberspace and the outer space will be the new battlefields of the new wars. And we have to be prepared to fight there. Cyber, maritime, and space. That's why we propose a European Union cyber defense policy and a space strategy to complement our security and defense. This has a civilian dimension and a military dimension. Both have to be developed. The third is to invest, because if we want to act, we need capacities. We need to have the right capacities or capabilities, whatever you want to call it. And through the compass, we have identified the critical capability shortfalls that we still have and the need to fill these gaps. We have to be at the cutting edge of the technological innovation, reduce fragmentation and dependencies of our defense markets. We have to increase our industrial capabilities to produce the tools and means that we need in order to be at the forefront of the technology of the new warfare. And finally, but not the least important, is to partner. In the compass, we propose a more ambitious partnerships and cooperation on security and defense, certainly, first of all, with NATO. And today we have had a lunch with the Secretary General of NATO, and everybody stressed the importance of increasing, strengthening, reinforcing our cooperation with NATO, because the strategic compass is a way of making NATO stronger through making the European Union stronger. As President Biden and President Macron said, and that for us is an important cornerstone, to increase the military capabilities of the European Union is a way of increasing and reinforcing the global security, the transatlantic link, in complement of NATO. But if something is complement to other thing, it means that they are not the same thing. In complement to NATO means that the European Union not only has member states who are members of NATO, but has the ambition to build a common security and defense policy in order to use its own capacities, alone when necessary, and together when possible. Concretely, the compass outlines why we need a stronger union, ready to be capable to protect citizens' values and interests of the Europeans. It will enhance the strategic responsibility or autonomy, whatever you want to call it, our ability to work with partners to safeguard our values and interests. I have to say that this approach was very broadly supported by the ministers. They expressed their readiness to continue working on it actively in view of the adoption of the final compass at the March European Union Council. In the meantime, from here to March, I will present at least two new drafts of the compass, incorporating the result of the work that is going to be done from now on the different working groups of the Council. But in general, I have to say that the member states supported the approach of defense capabilities, addressing hybrid challenges, and engaging with partners. Some ministers underlined the fact that our approach has to be complementary with NATO, certainly, beneficial to NATO, certainly, avoiding duplication, certainly, but duplication has to be avoided from both sides, from one side to another and vice versa, and ensuring coherence. In my view, this is fully guaranteed by the text I presented, because it's part of our ambition. But the important thing is to be able to translate ambition into action. And that's why the compass has a clear timeline and a review process that will help to achieve it and to implement it. This was yesterday. This morning we started with the steering board of the European Defence Agency, where we discussed defence innovation and how the agency that was created by a treaty, it's not an invention of the External Action Service or myself, was created by the treaty in order to have a body that pushes for the European defence common action on the field of capabilities. And today the ministers agreed on a set of revised principles for cooperation with third parties, and in particular, and I want to stress the importance of it, they endorsed the mandate for negotiating an administrative arrangement between the European Defence Agency, which I have the honor to chair, and the US Department of Defense. This is a clear sign of a strengthening transatlantic defense cooperation, and in parallel we are working to launch a dedicated dialogue on security and defense between the European Union and the United States. During the Council, I updated defense ministers on the mandate renewable by United Nations Security Council of the Eurofor Althea. That's a good news. I also informed ministers of the steps that we are taking to use the coordinated maritime presences, a concept that is also part of the compass but is already being implemented in the Gulf of Guinea, and how we could establish a new specific maritime area of interest in the Indo-Pacific early next year. We have to continue building on the common strategic culture of all member states, because the Indo-Pacific is very close for someone and very far from others. But here we have to share our threats and challenges. We have to put on the table everything that can be a problem for us. And certainly the Indo-Pacific area is one of the scenarios in which the European Union has to engage. We certainly discuss about Belarus. We certainly discuss about Belarus. Belarus is not a migration crisis, and we must respond with all possible tools to our disposal. And the hybrid toolbox that we are proposing in the Compass would be extremely relevant to face this kind of situations. We discussed the new project of PESCO, the training missions that we are deploying in Mozambique. How can we be more effective in Mali, Somalia, and Central African Republic? To summarize, the Compass includes a number of concrete proposals to strengthen mandates, to make our missions more agile, better equipped to respond to this information campaign, being able to proper advising, mentoring, equipping, and helping to reform the defense sector of our partners. And lastly, during the lunch, we hosted Secretary General Stoltenberg. We talk about European Union and NATO cooperation, about resilience, climate, emerging and disruptive technologies, and I think it was a big agreement on the need to advance together and strengthen our cooperation. And it should be clear now that the strategic compass has nothing to do about duplication with the NATO capacities. It's a matter of making the European pillar inside NATO stronger, and on doing so, making NATO stronger and the transatlantic relationship also stronger. Certainly, we discussed also about the Russian military build-up on the Ukrainian border. Let me say that we stand strongly and firmly behind Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, but I am sure you will ask more about it.
Thanks a lot. And yes, very much. Thanks a lot. And I will take some questions from the room first and then remotely. Irini, you have the first question.
Irini Zarkadoula with Greek Public TV and Athens News Agency. High Representative, I would...
Wait.
Okay.
Slowly.
Okay. I would like to ask you on this rapid deployment force. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the concrete details, for example, timeline, or where these 5,000 forces will be based, how it will work in real terms? Thank you.
When we talk about the deployment of military capabilities, we have to take into account the lessons of the past. In the past, we have been perhaps tended to be very much ambitious in our objectives, but not achieving so much, and so a certain disappointing from the point of view of results. In the strategic compass, we have decided to change the method to part from the basis that it is the mission that determines the nature of force that you need to deploy. That the important thing is not to have a pre-station force like the battle group, which has never been used, but to count on a certain number of modules specialized on different types of missions. Because you don't need the same capabilities or forces if the mission consists on evacuation of European nationals or interposition force between people who are fighting. You don't need the same type of capabilities. In some cases you will need a strong but small military force. In other cases you will need a very highly specialized type of interventions. So we need to be modular. We need to be ready to gather together different types of capacities with a certain level of dimension that as a maximum we consider 5,000. Remember that the Helsinki goals after the Yugoslavian wars, the European Union decided to build a capacity to deploy 60,000 troops. Well, war has changed a lot since then. And the strategic landscape also. Nobody's thinking today on deploying 60,000 troops. So we want to deploy capabilities. We want to deploy capabilities to be able to deploy forces on the basis that it has to be modular, they has to be adapted to the mission. And they have to be provided by member states. And from now on, we will go into details on the further discussions on the text.
Thank you. And now, Yuri, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Yuri Shiko, Deutsche Welle. Representative, I have two questions on the compass. First, you've already said that there were a lot of initiatives and ideas, but in defense and in security policy, European Union, well, the results were a little bit disappointing. So why do you think this time with the compass it will be... Do you hear me?
Sí, le escucho. Digo que no exagere usted. He dicho que no había sido siempre a la altura de lo que pretendíamos. Ciertamente nunca hemos desplegado 60.000 tropas.
Sometimes, so don't exaggerate.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm not Spanish.
Doesn't matter.
Continue.
Doesn't matter. Continue. We'll try to answer you.
He will answer you.
Okay, thank you. So why do you think this time with the compass it will be different? And with these partnerships, you talked a lot about partnership with NATO, but what about partnerships with countries like Ukraine, Georgia? How do you see here new types of partnerships and what is being talked in the strategic compass? And one more question while we are talking about Ukraine. So you discussed today again this military build-up, and it's very similar to what we saw in April with the build-up. So it was half a year ago. Did the EU use this time to come up with some tools and instruments to deter Russia from using this military build-up? So can you tell us at least a little bit what the EU is doing or is going to do? Thank you very much.
3 questions, Yuri.
Certainly we are following the situation in Ukraine, but as far as I know, we don't have with Ukraine nothing more than an association agreement which covers a broad range of issues, but not a military alliance. We don't have a military alliance with Ukraine. We have an association agreement, the Eastern Partnership, that covers a broad range, and we have solidarity with Ukraine, and we have the engagement to defend, to support the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And this will be continuing like this. On that, the compass doesn't point on anything specific. The compass tries to create capabilities for different kinds of situations. But you're asking what are we going to do tomorrow in Ukraine in front of what may happen in the border, which by the time being we don't have a lot of information, only the one that is being provided by the Ukrainian and the Americans. We will continue doing exactly the same thing, to support politically Ukraine, diplomatically, on the framework of the activities that has been developing since Russia took Crimea and started the war in Donbass. And certainly Ukraine can be sure of the political and diplomatic, economic and financial support of the European Union.
And maybe you want to answer on what is very different with the strategic compass as opposed to the initiatives before, right?
Certainly, what I wanted to say is that the previous initiative has been very much ambitious. And I just remembered that after the Yugoslavian war, on the Helsinki goals, we were talking about 60,000 troops that could be deployed quickly and be ready to fight for a long period of time. 60,000 troops. Now we are not talking about it because, as I said, the strategic environment and the nature of war, the nature of threats has changed completely. Today you don't need to move masses of troops. What you need is to mobilize specific capabilities, highly qualified to face new kinds of challenges. That's why we talk about capabilities deployment. And among the capabilities, there are forces, as in a particular case, and to a limited number. We can say the same thing about the battle groups, who were conceived and they have never been used. Maybe because the situation were not fitted to the capabilities that they were able to deploy, and because they were on the basis of a rotation responsibility of member states. Now it's a matter of pulling together different modules representing different kinds of capabilities provided by all member states at the same time.
Okay, and now I will take a question from the remotely, and I will give the floor to Susanna.
Thank you very much.
Please present yourself.
Susana Fresh, this IC Expresso Portugal. I have two questions. One, you mentioned the compass and the instruments in the compass, and you also mentioned that what's going on in the borders with Belarus, it's also an example. So I'd like to understand what exactly, how can these instruments could be used in helping to solve the current situation. And if I may, a second question, since I think you also discussed the EU mission, the EU training missions. Did the Portuguese Minister of Defense inform the colleagues about the ongoing investigation in Portugal related to the smuggling of diamonds and drugs from the Central African Republic, thank you, involving also Portuguese troops? I know this happened with the mission related to United Nations, but since Portugal is also participating in the EU training mission, I'd like to understand if this was an issue, if you are aware of this situation. Thank you. You can reply in Spanish if you want.
No, the answer is very easy in Spanish, in English, in French. It's very short. No. And about how the compass can help to address the current Belarus situation, well, what's happening, I want to insist on that. What is happening today in the Belarusian border shows that we are clearly facing a different kind of threats where everything is being weaponized. Migrants, human beings, picked up by plane several thousand of kilometers far away, has been converted in weapons and to send to the borders as a new tools of destabilization. That is exactly what the strategic compass is addressing, to create preparedness to respond to these threats. And we warn about this kind of threats and challenges, this kind of new situations, and the need to bring together all possible instruments that we have to respond to these attacks or campaigns in a coordinated, coherent, and effective way. For instance, the creation of the EU Rapid Hybrid Response Teams could allow member states to draw up a broad range of expertise that could be tailored to any situation at hand. And these teams could be temporarily supporting national actors in front of concrete situations like the one that we are witnessing in Belarus and Poland and Lithuania. Today we don't have this kind of tools. We don't have this kind of assets or capacities. It has to be created in order to be mobilized when needed. We call it European Union Rapid Hybrid Response Teams. It's clear which could be the purpose, and it's clear also that today we don't have them.
Okay, we have to wrap up, so I will take one last question, and it's Jacopo.
Thank you. Jacopo Regazzi with Politico. Thanks, IREP, for your time and for your explanations. Now, I have two questions. The first one is on duplication. If you can explain why the Rapid Entry Force will not be a duplication of the NATO's response force. What would be the difference? Why is not a duplication? And secondly, if it's possible to imagine a day when the Rapid Force will be deployed despite US objections, despite the US saying no to our intentions to deploy it. Thanks.
Pero no le busquen tres pies al gato.
Don't look for...
You are really looking for confrontation between the compass and NATO. It's a kind of obsession, not from you, but from many people. Not you necessarily, but I feel the perception that there is the view that when the Europeans want to build a common security and defense policy, it has to be against NATO. But why? I really don't understand. I don't understand why. If the members of NATO are stronger, NATO should be weaker. No. If the Europeans have more capacities, if they are ready to pull these capacities and use it in a more efficient way, this will be a benefit of our partnerships, starting with the NATO one. Look, even the President Biden and President Macron have had to say clearly that they consider that the increasing military capabilities of the European Union is something that will increase global security, reinforce transatlantic partnership in complement of NATO. I can repeat it once and 1,000 times. There is no alternative to NATO for the territorial defense of Europe. There is no alternative to NATO to the territorial defense of Europe. We are not trying to look for an alternative to NATO. Nobody wants it. It's just the way of conforming the capacity of the Europeans to act together according with the treaties to have a better capacity, because together we are stronger.
I think this will wrap up our press conference. We'll close our press conference
la última pregunta.
One last question.
Sorry? Une dernière?
Monsieur le représentant, si je peux me permettre, Nicolas Grouvieret en français, sur les missions UTM, sur les missions de formation. Je ne parle pas du problème portugais, mais je parle en général, je pense qu'il y a eu un débat là-dessus pour savoir si les Européens pouvaient agir davantage, si les missions pouvaient être plus efficaces. Je pense qu'il y a un problème d'effectifs dans ces missions, il y aurait peut-être aussi un problème d'équipement. Quelles sont les réponses que vous pouvez ou que vous voulez apporter?
So what kind of response can you provide to that? This is really the core business, after all, of these missions. It's training in these countries. Thank you.
Bueno, sí, c'est les missions de formation, mais il n'y a pas que ça.
Well, they are training missions, but it's not just that.
Il n'y a pas que ça. Il y a une chose qui s'appelle PESCO.
We have PESCO as well,
plus de 60
which mobilizes more than 60 projects in defense capabilities. 60.
Aujourd'hui, par exemple, on en a approuvé 14 de plus.
Approved another 14.
Avec ces 14, ça fait 60.
And with those 14 on top,
we're
talking about a total of 60, so don't forget that.
60 projets capacitaires.
We've got 6 capability projects
combler les gaps,
to fill the capability gaps which exist.
Et je pense que c'est quelque chose de très important. C'est
peut-être
pas trop visuel, parce que évidemment c'est pas un défilé sur
we're not talking about huge parades, military parades, but it is a way of building capabilities in the area of defense, and those are incredibly important. We do have training missions as well, of course.
Right now, Mali, in
the Central African Republic, in Mozambique.
Et c'est vrai que ces missions doivent faire face à des difficultés qui sont en partie conséquences de la situation politique de ces pays. Par exemple, le rôle que les compagnies Wagner jouent dans la République centrafricaine, c'est quelque chose qui touche la manière dont nous travaillons là. Nous devons savoir à quoi ça sert l'entraînement que nous faisons.
We have to work out what purpose training really serves in those countries.
puisque l'Union européenne n'a pas de capacités militaires.
The EU doesn't have its own military capabilities, so we depend on forced provision from member states.
Et parfois, on a des moments où on n'a pas toutes les ressources qu'il nous faudrait.
We don't have all the resources that we perhaps need.
Et parfois, quand il faut décider si on lance une nouvelle mission, on est en train de discuter, par exemple, la proposition pour lancer une mission de formation en Ukraine. Ça prend un certain temps.
And we have to take time to think about these things. These procedures are very slow. We have to have lots of discussions.
Mais ce n'est pas seulement dans le domaine de la défense.
But that isn't a problem just in the area of defense. Generally speaking,
nos missions fonctionnent
our missions work well,
mais ils pourraient être plus efficaces.
But they could be more effective.
Sans doute. On pourrait en avoir plus.
Yes, we could have more missions.
Sans doute.
No doubt.
Mais pour cela, il faut la volonté des États membres de contribuer avec les moyens nécessaires.
With the necessary resources.
Mais le Strategic Compass
the strategic compass is dealing with these matters. There's a whole chapter dedicated to the necessity and importance of strengthening and making our military missions more effective, the non-executive missions.
Les missions qui ont pour but l'entraînement et la capacitation des forces, des armées, des pays avec lesquels nous avons des partenariats
countries with which we have strategic partnerships.
Oui, le représentant est très en retard. Cela conclut donc notre conférence de presse. Et merci à vous tous et pour votre patience également. Bon après-midi. Merci aux traducteurs également.
And have a pleasant afternoon.